Maria Kemp is living the dream. No, she's not living in a beach house in Costa Rica or backpacking around Europe. She lives on a ranch in beautiful Bishop, California, my hometown. The dream she's living is the one every mom evokes when our kids refuse to take out the trash. That's when we say, if only we lived on a farm, then they'd know what hard work is. Turns out that's pretty true, actually. Ria's 3 children, ages 11, 9, and 6, are the 6th generation that have worked on this ranch, raising cattle, sheep, and other animals. I talked to Ria about what kind of work her kids do.
You know, the kids basically, as far as like cow work and riding, have ridden with us on the easier days, since they were babies in actually an infant front pack. And then from that, they transitioned to just riding in front of me on a very safe, gentle horse. And then they transitioned to being led on a horse until they're finally riding their own horse. And really, by the time they're 6 or so, like that's how old Kate is now. I mean, you can kind of count on them as, decent help to go turn the cows if needed. Or, Will at 11 is great help. So it does happen organically, and it just happens over the course of time because it has to, because we don't really have any other options. Like, well, here's what we're doing today, and we're doing it as a family because it's a family ranch, and it has been for 6 generations now. So here's what you're doing today. I think they know it's just kind of expected of them, and I hope they enjoy it because in an odd way, it's also how we spend time as a family. They get to spend all day riding with their grandpa. So it's also a pretty, neat opportunity for them. They don't grumble too much.
The kids help herd the cattle in the summer, feed the animals morning and night in the winter, brand the calves in the spring, and take care of baby lambs as soon as they're born. They also raise their own lambs for 4-H, and you don't get higher stakes than that.
If you don't feed it, it's going to die.
This is the How She Moms podcast, where we talk about how different moms solve the same problems. I'm Whitney Archibald, a mother of 5 kids myself. I collect ideas so you can pick and choose what works for you and your family. I'm guessing that most of you listeners don't live on a ranch or a farm. Is it even possible to teach our kids to work hard if we don't? That's what we're going to explore in this episode, part 3 of a 3-part series about teaching kids to work. Episode 11 was how to teach kids to clean. Episode 13 was how to teach kids to be tidy. In this episode, we'll talk about how to motivate kids to work once they have the necessary skills. Because as you know, teaching kids to do something does not mean they actually will do it. We're not just talking about housework here. This applies to developing talents, getting an education, and anything else that requires work and perseverance. I inherited a beautiful set of books from my grandmother called the Encyclopedia of Motherhood, published in 1951. The content is about what you would expect. Some of it is terrifying, with some terrible medical and psychological advice. Some of it is charming and quaint, and some is really smart. One entry that fits into the really smart category is entitled Work Children Can Do. The author, Margaret Ilsley DeMar, a mother of 5, gave a really good overview of what motivates children. She said, children like to work when they can see some useful or interesting result, when there is congenial companionship, when their ego is allowed to grow through learning new skills, taking responsibility, or helping to make the plans, when their efforts are appreciated even though they make mistakes, when they are really needed, and when their parents' attitudes toward work are constructive. I've taken some of Margaret's ideas, as well as ideas from other moms and other books, and organized them into 10 tactics to help motivate our kids to work hard. The first tactic is to assign jobs with tangible results. Part of the reason farm living is such a great way to teach kids to work is that kids can see a tangible, real-life correlation between the work they do and the well-being and even survival of their families and animals. This is why Maria loves 4-H.
The big driving force for me growing up was 4-H and FFA, raising, your own animals, and you are the sole and only caretaker for their health and well-being and making sure that they're fed several times a day. And I feel like that's a really big thing because I don't touch them. I don't feed those animals. So Will's out there. He's the only one who's old enough quite yet, but so he feeds his animals, twice a day and reports back to me, and he's made them gentle, and they have to keep a record book with all of their expenses and kind of notes on their projects. And we just turned them in, and I went and helped judge all of the kids' record books, and probably at least a half a dozen of them in their little story that they have to write, talk about how 4-H is making them a more responsible person because they're not indoors playing their video games. They're out and there's animals that are relying on them. So I thought that was neat.
The kids track the physical growth of their animals, and they can see how the work they do, feeding and caring for those animals, contributes to that growth. Then, of course, the big fat check at the end is pretty tangible too. Maria used her 4-H profits from when she was a kid for the down payment of her first house. You can read more about Maria's story as well as look at her gorgeous pictures of life on the ranch at howshemoms.com. The article is called How Maria Teaches Kids to Work. For mundane household chores, it can be harder to demonstrate such tangible results, especially for cyclical maintenance jobs like laundry and kitchen cleaning that seem to start over as soon as you finish. With jobs like these, including cleaning bedrooms, which can also be pretty cyclical, we can make a point to relish the results. Look at all that space you have to play now. Doesn't your room look so beautiful? Isn't it so nice to have all your laundry done and put away? But it's also useful to assign your kids finite projects with a finish line. This can be anything from organizing a drawer or closet to helping with a landscaping project to perfecting a piece of music for a recital. There's a clear goal at the end and a clear result. Planting and tending a garden is a great way to teach this because you get great results at the end. You can also see a little bit more immediate results when you don't take care of your garden. One example of a big tangible project is from the Searle family, who decided they wanted to finish their basement so the teenagers could have a place to hang out. They didn't have the budget to pay someone to finish it for them, so they decided to tackle the project themselves as a family. They learned how to move the plumbing and gas lines, hang the drywall, mud and tape it, every step. Although the big goal of a finished basement took more than a year, there were tangible checkpoints along the way, such as inspections at the different stages, that helped keep them engaged in the project and working hard together in the evenings after school and work. When they finally did finish the basement, they were so proud to show their friends what they had created, and as they planned, the basement was usually full of teenagers. The second tactic is to find your kids' currency. Sometimes the satisfaction of a job well done, a clean bedroom, or the promise of a finished basement a year from now just isn't enough to motivate kids to work. This does not mean you have lazy, spoiled children. It means you have human children. In fact, at this moment, I am unmotivated to clean my kitchen, even though I know how good it feels when it's clean. Sometimes intrinsic motivation is not enough to get me up and cleaning. So even for myself, I often plan little rewards along the way. For example, once the dishes are all loaded in the dishwasher, I get to read a chapter in my book or play a song on the piano. Or I'll save a favorite podcast for dish time so I look forward to it. The same principle works with kids, of course, just maybe with different rewards. Like so much of parenting, the actual currency that motivates kids will vary from kid to kid. I have one sweet-toothed kid who would do just about anything for a tic-tac. One loves to check boxes on a chart. One wakes up early and does his chores faithfully every day so we can have a little screen time before school. Another likes cold, hard cash. Still another loves to play with friends. And some kids sincerely just want to help out. I have a sweet nephew named Isaiah that's like this. This summer, Molly discovered her daughter's currency in perhaps the best deal a mom could ever make.
So my daughter, who's 13, her name's Olivia, we were shopping one day and she wanted a pair of Birkenstock sandals for the summer. And I thought that was way too expensive for a 13-year-old. So she negotiated and said, Mom, she said, I will potty train Charlotte, who is our youngest daughter, who's almost 3, if you buy me these sandals. And I was like, deal. So we talked about all the details about how she was in charge of cleaning everything up and that she was in charge of helping her go to the bathroom and that this was until she was fully potty trained. And we bought a toy that Charlotte picked out and put it on the fridge for incentive. And then we put Olivia's Birkenstocks on the fridge for incentive too, for both of them. And really, she had Charlotte potty trained within the week.
I think we all know who came out ahead in that deal. Rewarding the kids with money is a controversial topic. In fact, the next episode of this podcast is going to be titled The Great Allowance Debate. But money can sure be a big motivation for some kids, and as a bonus, it's how the real world works too. You work, you make money. Emily Woodison, who we've heard from several times on this podcast, pays her kids to do their chores, but since she has 9 children of her own as well as foster kids, It's hard to keep enough cash on hand. Here's what she does instead.
I just have those gold tokens that are just plastic. So I have each token worth 50 cents. And so I pay them their allowance. We pay them their allowance in those, unless we have cash laying around, which we rarely do. We pay them in those, and then they can trade it in for cash or money when they need it. Or they give it to me and I buy something on Amazon.
Emily also keeps prizes in a drawer in her room, which she calls the mom store.
The little kids love the mom store because it's that instant gratification. A lot of times I'll have stuff in my drawer. My little kids will just come bring me their tokens and they'll get it that way. So I would say the stuff I have in my drawer is for maybe 10 and younger. And then my older kids are primarily Amazon, or they're going to a movie with friends.
Last summer, Philip Jackson encouraged his daughters to earn some money by detailing their neighbor's car. It was the first time they had worked for someone outside their family. They negotiated a price of $20, and they worked until they got the job done, even though dinner was a little late that day. We love dads here on How She Moms, too. Philip is on Instagram at The Building Dad. He's also great at Tactic 1, giving the kids finite projects, because he loves to build stuff with his daughters. Tactic 3 is to let them experience natural consequences. A corollary to the idea of rewarding kids for working is letting them see the natural consequences if they don't do a job. These consequences don't have to be as extreme as letting their lamb die if they don't feed it. It can just mean letting them live in a messy bedroom until they can't find anything, let alone the floor, and they finally cave. It's tempting to bail our kids out when they don't do their chores and just do it ourselves. It's faster, and sometimes it's less hassle than trying to get them to do it. Plus, we don't want to live in squalor. But for one thing, that sets a bad precedent. Good luck getting them to do it the next time. It also sends the message that their contribution isn't really necessary. And, as our friend Margaret from that encyclopedia in the 50s says, I suppose the need to be needed is one of the deepest aspects of human nature. Children certainly find great satisfaction in being really needed. Nothing says I don't really need your help like doing our kids' jobs for them. For a while, my kids were terrible about doing their kitchen jobs, not even clearing their own plates. So I told them that I only cook in clean kitchens and that it was their job to clean it. If the dishes were not done from a previous meal, I would make beans and rice, but nothing more. We ate several meals of rice and beans before they got the picture. Linda and Richard Iyer, authors of the book Teaching Your Children Responsibility, have a great suggestion for showing kids how important household jobs are. Just take the day off. They suggest that you pick a day that the family will be home most of the day and see what happens if no one lifts a finger. No fixing official meals, except meals for small children who can't get their own. No picking up clutter, no sweeping, no doing laundry or emptying the garbage. Nada. They say, by evening you'll have a good deal of distemper, some hungry children, a messy house, and a high level of chaos and confusion. Your kids will also have a new appreciation for why chores matter. Tactic 4 is to harness the power of toddlers. This might be my favorite tactic because it's so amazing and so true. You might think that kids' motivation to help would increase with age and maturity. However, the evidence suggests that the opposite is true. Toddlers hold the prize. As moms, we know this. When a toddler successfully tosses a wad of paper into the trash, he walks back beaming. He wants to quote-unquote help with everything mom does around the house, from laundry to dishes to sweeping the floor. NPR did a remarkable story about this in an anthropological context. The article is entitled How to Get Your Kids to Do Chores Without Resenting It. It talks about an anthropologist named Susan Gaskin who interviewed children in a Mayan village in Mexico. The kids went on and on about how much they helped around the house, but they weren't complaining. They were enthusiastic about their skills. They even volunteered to do much of the work they did. Researchers discovered that one of the big reasons these older kids were so helpful is that moms in their culture cultivated their natural inclinations to help when they were toddlers. The article quotes psychologist Rebecca Mejia Arauz, excuse my pronunciation, in Guadalajara, who says, doing things with other people makes them happy and is important for their emotional development. They see what their mom or siblings are doing and they want to do it. The article goes on to hypothesize that traditional American culture does not see the same results because we often shoo toddlers away when they offer to help instead of inviting them in. It suggests that we change our mindsets and invite toddlers to work alongside us, cultivating that natural desire to help while they're still enthusiastic, even if you know the task will take longer with their help. The whole article is just fantastic. I'll link it in my show notes. Another thing that might keep us from inviting young children to work with us is the idea that they should be off playing. In the book The Anthropology of Childhood, David S. Lancy says, "While we hamstring our children to keep them from working, fearing their loss of innocence and studiousness, the norm elsewhere is to open the path to adulthood." The idea that play is the work of childhood is a very new idea. While there's a lot of truth to it, sometimes actual work is the work of childhood too. And anyone who's seen a child play with a toy kitchen or a play vacuum knows that work can also be the play of childhood. It's all interwoven. Kids really love to pretend they're adults. There's a whole chapter in The Anthropology of Childhood that goes into great depth about the sophisticated chore curriculum in indigenous cultures around the world and the, quote, almost idyllic process whereby bright-eyed, eager children take up the tasks of their elders and persist until mastery. These kids are learning at a really young age to do chores like gardening, herding, gathering, hunting, fishing, cooking, caring for other children, and making various handicrafts. Reading about all the things these kids do made me realize that we often really underestimate what children are capable of. This is as good a time as any to talk about something we probably should have said up front. If you, like me, are struggling with the problem of how to motivate kids to work, we're actually really lucky moms with lucky kids. First world problems all the way. In many countries all around the world, kids work hard because they have to. It's a matter of survival. This doesn't mean that motivating our kids to work hard is an insignificant problem. It's one we should absolutely address. I just thought we should take a minute to count our blessings and then maybe take a page from some of these cultures that have such helpful children, pull a chair up to the sink, and hand our toddlers a sponge. The fifth tactic is to work with our kids. Working together is not just for toddlers. Time spent working alongside your kids can also be time spent working on your relationships. My friend Jana especially likes weeding with her kids because they're working side by side outside and it's mindless work, so there's ample opportunity to talk. Nicole Searle learned this principle long ago from her grandfather and has carried it into her own family.
When I was in kindergarten, I had afternoon start. So in the morning, I would help my grandpa, who lived next door. I'd have to cross a little bridge to go to his house. And I would help him gather the eggs of the chickens and feed the cows. And he had a garden that was, I think, an acre. It was huge. And we'd work in it together. And I just loved working with him. And he would always say that you can do any terrible job. You could be shoveling manure in a ditch. But if you're with the right person, it's enjoyable. And so I just loved working with him. He was just my best friend. One of my professors in college, he said, the purpose of the task is to strengthen the relationship. It doesn't matter what task or job we have to accomplish, whether it's emptying the dishwasher, if we're doing it with the purpose of strengthening a relationship, it's even better. That's our whole end goal. So I try to remember that sometimes it's not about how fast I can get the job done, but if I can get somebody to work on it with me, even better. Or even if I'm doing it solo, I can think the whole purpose of this task is to help my family or serve someone. It's to strengthen a relationship that way. And they may not know that I did this task for them, but I feel differently about them having served them.
And now a quick break to talk about our sponsor, Lucky and Me. How many times have you taken a gamble on a sealed package of underwear from a department store, the kind plastered with cartoon characters? I try to get my kids to pick the plainest, least garish design, but I usually cave to some hideous print that he or she just can't live without. After all, I figure, who's going to see it? Then, a few weeks later, the beloved, ugly underwear is stretched out, saggy and droopy, and can't be all that comfortable. And because I have a little one who thinks it's hilarious to run around in his skivvies, the whole neighborhood ends up seeing it anyway. Enter Lucky and Me, a children's clothing company that makes underwear that's both comfortable and cute. They're made of soft organic cotton, and they don't sag or wedge, even after multiple washings. I love them, and my kids love them. In fact, I need to order some more because suddenly they don't want to wear their old saggy underwear anymore. Lucky and Me is offering How She Moms listeners 25% off if you use the offer code HOW25 at luckyandme.com. Do your kids' cute little bums a favor and try them out. The sixth tactic, that's really hard to say, the sixth tactic is less touchy-feely. Think of yourself as the HR manager for your family. I often compare running a family to running a company. But when it comes to kids and work, it seems a little crass or uncaring to characterize them as employees. Be that as it may, the analogy works surprisingly well. We assign them tasks, we usually reward them in some way when they do them, whether it's with money like a typical employee or not, and we have to deal with it when they don't follow through. One obvious way this analogy breaks down is that we can't fire them when they do a terrible job. But it's also possible that thinking of your children as employees might actually improve the way you interact with them. Think, would I talk to an employee this way? If these kids are our employees and we're their managers, despite the number of times they shout, "You're not the boss of me," it makes sense to have some kind of HR strategy within your family. Last year, my husband and I listened to an audiobook called 3 Signs of a Miserable Job. If you have trouble finding this book, that's because somewhere between the audiobook recording and the publication of the hard copy book, that title changed to a much more boring one, The Truth About Employee Engagement. It was written by Patrick Lencioni. Here's how he describes a miserable job. It's the one you dread going to and can't wait to leave. It's the one that saps your energy even when you're not busy. It's the one that makes you go home at the end of the day with less enthusiasm and more cynicism than you had when you left in the morning. Could there be a better explanation of how kids feel about doing chores around the house? My kids definitely dread cleaning time. They grumble and complain and drag their feet. They immediately act like they're exhausted, as if they've never had a speck of energy in their lives, as if they weren't just running around like maniacs in the basement. Lencioni then identifies 3 specific reasons that people hate their jobs. The first is anonymity. He says, people cannot be fulfilled in their work if they are not known. All human beings need to be understood and appreciated for their unique qualities by someone in a position of authority. Obviously, our kids aren't anonymous. We know them better than anyone else does. But do the jobs we assign them reflect this? Do we rotate them through a bunch of generic chores that have nothing to do with their individual strengths and abilities? Some chores just have to be done regularly and by each child. Rooms have to get cleaned, laundry has to get done, the kitchen has to get cleaned. I just divide those chores up between the kids. But there are lots of other chores that you can customize to your kids' strengths. Just like how when you run a company, you don't usually ask the accountant to take photos for your website, and you don't ask the marketing director to write the code for a new app. One way to motivate our kids to work is to match assignments to strengths. For example, my 3rd son has an incredible imagination and is a baby whisperer. Even though he's not old enough to babysit, I often give him the chore of entertaining the younger kids while I make dinner, help the older kids with homework or piano, or whenever I need to focus on something. He does a much better job than his 2 older brothers, who quickly lose interest. Another of my sons is good at figuring out electronics. I often assign him to figure out how some new gadget works, from a clock radio to a new app. He also really enjoys cooking, so he often gets that job too. My Lego whiz is also my go-to IKEA assembler. My 7-year-old daughter is great at reading bedtime stories to her little brother, and she cooks a mean scrambled egg. This kind of specialization definitely emerged for the Searle family while they were finishing their basement. Their oldest son, Cameron, was all in. He's always been interested in construction and is studying construction management now as a 21-year-old. But this was not the case for all the kids.
One of our daughters didn't really want to be involved as much in the construction part of it. That didn't interest her as much. So she took it upon herself to be the chef. So if we're working all day long, then her job was to make us meals. And she would go up and she would cook and she'd bring it down to us or call us that it was time to eat. And we loved that. That was her job.
You're probably wondering what the other 2 signs of a miserable job are. The second one is irrelevance. Lencioni says, everyone needs to know that their job matters to someone. Anyone. The 3rd sign of a miserable job is lack of measurement. He says, employees need to be able to gauge their progress and level of contribution for themselves. Without a tangible means for assessing success or failure, motivation eventually deteriorates. These both lead to our 7th tactic, offer praise and recognition. Charts and reward systems are one common way to measure a kid's progress. This is often really effective, depending on the kid. But this podcast would last forever if I talked about all the different methods for marking their progress on charts. You can look on Pinterest for that. But tracking their progress doesn't have to be complicated. Just noticing when your kids work hard and telling them how much you appreciate it goes a long way. Good old-fashioned positive reinforcement. Better yet, let them overhear you telling someone else how hard the child worked. Juliana is really good at positive reinforcement. In the mornings before school, she checks the kids' rooms really quickly. Then, rather than focusing on the 3 beds that were not made, she calls up the one kid whose bed was made, gives her a big hug, and says, I am so proud of you for taking care of your room and making your bed. That really helps our mornings go smoothly. Great job, kiddo. This reminds the others how much she appreciates this simple thing of making the bed, and chances are they will remember it the next morning when they're tempted to leave their beds unmade. And it's so much more effective than nagging. One day, Richard Eyre brought a few of his kids in to watch while he tidied his den. While he cleaned, he talked about how good he feels when it's clean. Then, after he finished, he put a brightly colored sign on the door that said Pride. They all wanted one of their own, and he told them they could once they felt proud of the way their own rooms looked. Richard and his wife Linda continued to bring the signs out now and again whenever they needed a refresher on tidiness. Candy Kid likes to celebrate her kids' cleaning successes in real time while they're cleaning. Here's a clip of Candy from the very first episode of the 3 in 30 podcast, entitled Getting Unmotivated Kids to Help. She says,
So for my 5-year-old, his family contribution is to sort our laundry. And one night he just was not having it. And so I said, let's do a celebration blitz. And I said, I'll show you. And so I threw the whites into a white pile and I said, woohoo. And then I colored into the colored pile and I said, booyah. And we went on. And then he started joining in. And by the end, he was like jumping up, giving me 5. I think there was even some karate kicks in there. And then the sweetest thing happened when we finished. He threw his little 5-year-old arms around me and he's like, thanks, Mom. I've never felt like that before.
Oh, I love that.
And then after that, like sometimes he would get like a little bit dysregulated and he'd say, hey, Mom, let's go sort laundry.
Wow.
Because he loved the way that he feels. And so sometimes when we're having like those, no one wants to help. It's like, okay, let's do a celebration blitz. And my little kids start celebrating.
Tactic number 8 is to give them ownership. After I read the book about miserable jobs, I realized that in the real world, people get to apply for jobs. They don't just get assignments. So I printed up a page full of job listings and posted it on my wall. I advertised positions for garbage manager, lawnmower, vacuum manager, menu assistant, and sous chef, with job descriptions and compensation amounts for each position. I let the kids know I had some jobs available, and a couple of them took me up on it. Their interest has waxed and waned, and some of them end up changing from week to week or going undone. But my 7-year-old daughter surprised me by snatching up the garbage manager position that nobody else wanted. She's been a consistent garbage manager for several months now. She cheerfully takes out the kitchen garbage each day and makes weekly rounds, emptying garbages and replacing garbage liners. She's motivated by the $8 she makes each week, but also by being my dependable go-to garbage girl. She's pretty teeny, so we've rigged it so she can reach the cans. We put an old piece of furniture out there, and she climbs up on that so she can reach to drop the bags into the garbage cans. Sometimes those kitchen bags are almost as big as she is. When we give kids ownership of a chore and let them take charge of it without micromanaging, they're often much more motivated to do a good job. In another great episode of the 3 in 30 podcast, entitled 3 Battles You Can Let Your Child Win, host Rachel Nielsen interviewed Lisa Anderson of Thriving Motherhood. One of the battles Lisa lets her kids win is deciding when they do their chores or homework. Here's a clip from that episode.
When you say, okay, do your homework right now, right this second, most kids are going to be like, no, I don't want to. But if you approach them like with my older son, I just say, hey, what's your plan for homework today? And I let him let me know when he's planning on doing his homework. So he knows that I expect it to be done. And I let him say, oh, I'm going to do it after we eat dinner, or I'm going to do it right before I have soccer practice. And we kind of compromise that way so that it's not me saying, okay, you're doing your homework at 3:00, sit down, do it no matter what.
And I love that question. What's your plan for homework today? Because it's really, you're the support. You're giving them the independence and responsibility and teaching them that they need to manage their time and figure it out. And you're there to support them and guide them and help them make a plan.
Yes. So as a parent, you share your expectations. Like, I expect your bed to be made. Well, that's not an expectation in my house. It should be. I expect your floor to be clean. I expect your homework to be done. And I expect your family contribution to be done by the end of the day. That's your expectation. And give them the space to be able to do it when it works for them. And I feel like for younger kids, this amount of freedom isn't going to work, but you can still give them choices instead of battling it out for the little kids too. Like, if you want them to clean up their toys, you can say something like, well, do you want to clean up your toys? Should we clean up your toys now? Or do you want to read a book first and then clean up your toys?
I totally remember this phenomenon as a kid. I actually liked doing my chores, but only if no one asked me to do them. It was exciting for me to show that I could handle the responsibility on my own, but when someone asked me to do my chores, I suddenly lost all interest. Another aspect to giving kids ownership is to let them make their own decisions. Part of my daughter's garbage manager job is to create the system of how she's going to manage this project each week. My kids are all the managers of their own bathrooms, which means they get to decide whether to clean them daily or weekly and who's in charge of what responsibilities. I inspect them based on the cleaning schedule they create. Part of the reason Nicole's kids were so motivated to help with the basement project is that they got to help make many of the big decisions.
If they had a say in how it was going to turn out, they were much more invested. And so as far as the architectural planning of it, how the bedrooms would be arranged, where things would go, we definitely tried to involve them in it and choosing the colors and made it a family effort.
The next tactic is something I used to be really good at, though I've kind of run out of steam as I've added more children. Number 9 is to make cleaning fun. I used to be super creative at cleaning time, making up all sorts of games. When my oldest son was obsessed with watching YouTube reruns of Inspector Gadget, I would write down missions on slips of paper and hand them to him. He'd read them, crumple them up, throw them back at me, and I'd pretend to explode like Chief Quimby. Moms of a certain age will know what I'm talking about here. Sometimes I'd even write different jobs and different fun activities on pieces of paper, slip them inside balloons, blow them up, and have the kids pop the balloons to see what job or activity we got to do next. My younger kids have no idea any of this fun ever happened, so I should probably keep this episode on the down low. But you don't have to be overly ambitious like I used to be to motivate your kids with a bit of fun now and then. One of the best ways is a simple game of pretend. My sister, Cassie Gadd, often encourages her kids to role play. This works especially well for her daughter, who has a dramatic flair. Sometimes they pretend they're maids for a very rich and very evil homeowner who then comes and inspects and criticizes what they've done.
And also, like, sometimes we pretend that they're orphans, like Annie. And somehow, whenever you add an orphan into the mix, it becomes 10 times more romantic. I think that is, like, the best ever.
Another great example of a pretending game is from Nanive French. When her kids were little, she and a friend would swap houses at the end of cleaning day and pretend to be cleaning fairies, complete with white gloves, come to inspect the children's work. Another way to integrate a bit of fun is to add in some friendly competition, racing against the clock or each other. My friend Amber Adams used to take time-lapse videos of her kids cleaning up the playroom and then play it back for the kids so they could see how fast they looked. This was super motivating to them. Of course, a cleaning game is even more fun if there are built-in rewards. One of the only games I still bring out once in a while is one we call Jackpot. I pick 3 objects in the room, and after a kid puts one of them away, I say, ding, 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 and I give them a small prize like a quarter or a gummy worm or something like that. Sometimes we rotate, and I let the kids take turns picking the jackpot items, and I clean with the other kids. Nothing gets them scurrying around to pick things up quite like this game. Sometimes we also play a game we call Whipped Clean, where I give the kids a squirt of whipped cream right into their mouths when they finish mini cleaning missions. Another reward-based game my sister invented arose from a moment of desperation. Here's Cassie again.
So one day I was ticked. There were neighbors over, and I really had a messy house, and I had anticipated having my kids clean all day. And so I was so frustrated when I didn't have their attention because they had these friends over. It was dinner time, and I hadn't even thought of dinner, and I was like, get into the house. We are done. Like, this is not okay. And I was so ticked. I was like, you can't eat any dinner until this room is clean. This is a dump, and just going off. And I was furious. And they started pushing back. And so it just escalated and made everything horrible. And then I just kind of paused for a second, and I was like, this is not helping to be so frustrated with them because they didn't do anything wrong. Like, they had friends come over. They didn't even invite their friends over. They just came. So I was like, okay, I need to stop. What could we do to, like, turn this around and make it so it's a game that they can be rewarded instead of punished for something they didn't even do? So I just took a deep breath and I said, I'm sorry. I'm frustrated and I'm stressed out because this is a dump. Like, I don't want to live this way, and I know you don't want to live this way. So I said, all right, we're going to play a game. And if you can get so much stuff done, then you're at the first level, and we can have ice cream after dinner. But if you get this many things picked up, then you will go up a level. You'll level up. My kids don't even play video games. They have no idea what, like, leveling up was, but they thought it was cool anyway. So I was like, if you get this much, then you can have ice cream with chocolate sauce on top. If you get this much, then you can have chocolate sauce and spray whipped cream. So it just kind of was like every time they leveled up or did something better than just the average, what was required, then they would get something cooler on their ice cream. And it wasn't even like amazing things like nuts on their ice cream, which some of them don't even love having nuts on their ice cream, but because it was leveling up, they thought it was so cool. And so they totally worked hard, and it just changed it from being a total tyrant and so frustrated with my life and with them to them being excited, and they're working to earn something.
I'll link to a blog post I wrote with more ideas for cleaning games in my show notes. The final tactic is to set a finish line. If we just say, "Okay, kids, we're going to clean the whole house today," they're bound to go boneless and to weep and wail. To avoid this, Jana Free starts their working Saturdays with a finite list that the family completes together. They cross jobs off the list as they go so they can see their progress. Several moms I talk to use timers as their finish line. They set a specific amount of time for a task and they work until the timer goes off. And sometimes you need to chunk up a task so you have several finish lines. The best thing that happened for bedroom cleaning in our house is when I printed off step-by-step instructions and taped them up in my kids' closet as a reference. Now they know to pick up the trash first, then books, then clothes, etc. This idea of dividing tasks into bite-sized chunks is what Lindsay Nielsen, the genius behind the Instagram account The Lindsay Report, refers to as the stick trick, based on a poem she read years ago. I'll let her explain.
This kid was told he couldn't play with his friends until he weeded the garden. And the garden was just huge, and there were just rows and rows and rows. And he was just so overwhelmed. The dad tells him, just throw your stick as far as you can and weed to it. And so he did. He goes, now pick it up and throw it again. And so the poem goes on to say that he did this. He kept just weeding to his stick, and he kept throwing his stick and weeding to his stick. And it's like, before he knew it, the rows hadn't grown shorter. The rows had just been easier to weed because he had weeded them with a will, but also he broke it off into peaceable actions. And so often I'm like, okay, I don't feel good today. I have a migraine. I have this going on. I have fatigue. What am I going to throw my stick to?
You can hear more of Lindsay's great ideas on episode 97 of the Family Looking Up podcast. I love the idea of the stick trick because it's actually so applicable to this whole process of teaching kids how to work. All we can do is keep throwing our sticks, giving our kids more and more responsibility. Here's Maria again.
Overall, I think it's a lot of work on a parent, to instill that young. But I'm hoping that down the road it will pay off and make their future almost easier for them because, as any adult knows, working and just adulting is a lot of work.
It is.
Yeah, so I guess hopefully that we're preparing them to not be, set up for such a shock.
Whether you live on a ranch or in a townhouse, I'm guessing there's enough work at your house to go around. Hopefully some of the moms from this episode will inspire you with new ways to motivate your own kids to get her done. Thank you for listening to the How She Moms podcast. I'd love to find out how you mom. There are 4 main ways to add your voice to this How She Moms community. First, you can email me at whitney@howshemoms.com, or you can go to my contribute page at howshemoms.com and find out what topics I'm currently researching. There will be questionnaires that you can fill out there. You can also follow me on Instagram to see daily tips about how different moms approach the current topic. Finally, you can sign up to receive email questionnaires for each new topic so you can contribute your ideas. Special thanks to my mom for playing my theme music. She's been playing this song since I was a little girl, and to me, it's part of the soundtrack of motherhood.